Hello and welcome to Speechies Talk About. I'm your host, Zoe Gilbertson, and this series we're talking about how supervision can be different. Today I've got Rachel Barton. Hi.
Hi there. Hi.
Hi. And we're going to talk a bit about supervision and AI, which I'm very excited about.
Yeah, we're very much in the 21st century, aren't we?
But what I'd like to start with is just getting to know you a little bit. So, if you weren't a speech and language therapist, what might you have been?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I've thought about it a bit, and I think potentially a counsellor.
Mm,
That's quite a good fit for my skills, and I guess there's quite a lot of crossover there, isn't there, with supervision.
mm,
I did do the first year of training with counsellors and psychotherapists, which is sort of like a theoretical year, whilst I was a speech and language therapist, just to sort of dip my toe in, I think. So, yeah, possibly a counsellor. But I think the other thing is I've always loved just sort of sitting and thinking about issues and problems. So also I think I'd love to sort of sit in a think tank somewhere and
oh,
just
yeah.
solve the world's problems. Or yeah, so who knows? But I guess what I would say as speech and language therapist is a pretty good fit for for my sort of skills and interests.
Yeah. Yeah. And what area of speech therapy do you work in?
So I've always worked in paediatrics.
Mhm.
I started in the NHS. I worked in the NHS for just over 20 years, and then I moved into independent practice about 8 years ago, which I love. And now I have sort of quite a mix within my career. So I do about a day's worth of actual clinical work still. So that's with children and families, either in their homes or in schools, which I love. Really interested in speech sound disorders, particularly. But then I also do lots of supervision, which is great. And I do training for speech and language therapists and other professionals around the use of AI within their professions. I
Yeah.
also coordinate our local ASLTIP group, so that's our independent network. There's over 40 members.
Gosh.
And I'm also writing a book at the moment as
Oh my
well. So
goodness.
so I like to
Busy.
fill my week with a whole variety of different things. And I think that's the sort of the joy of independent practice is you can kind of follow your sort of interests and skills and develop this kind of
Yeah.
multifaceted career. So yes, it's quite a juggle at times, but I
Yeah.
enjoy all the different aspects.
What's the book on?
So the book is actually a children's book and it relates to helping children to understand speech sound difficulties by helping them to understand what's going on in their brains. So yeah, I'm working with a great illustrator at the moment just to kind of put that together and hopefully that will be out maybe early next year, possibly. So yeah, it's a really exciting project.
Oh, amazing. Oh, I look forward to seeing it. So, we're here to talk a bit about, I guess, what you've done a lot of training on for other speech therapists as well. It's talking about AI and speech
Mm.
therapy, but specifically, what could AI add to SLT professional supervision? I hadn't thought of this before.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting topic, isn't it? Because it's so new. ChatGPT came onto the scene at the end of November 2022. So, we're still within those sort of first few years of using these tools. And I think that what I'm noticing is that, sort of some people are kind of embracing these tools and seeing how they can perhaps be incorporated into their practice. Other people are keeping well away from them and everywhere in between. So, because it's an area that I've got really involved in and I'm sort of doing a lot of training in it, I just thought it would be helpful to think about like what might be the overlap, what might be the crossover between using an AI to support your practice and working with a human being.
Mm.
Um, And I suppose there's a sort of a few things that I think of to start with. One, in the context of supervision is, sometimes we know that we want to discuss something in supervision, and I think it's absolutely fine to kind of turn up to supervision, not necessarily having thought that through a great deal, but just knowing that it's a kind of an issue. Maybe you can kind of feel it in your body, like this is just something that I need to explore, and you're just going to take that.
Mm,
But sometimes you might want to actually just spend some time sort of working through your thoughts beforehand. So, AI actually can be quite a good pre-supervision thinking partner. So
mm,
maybe, and I use it quite a lot just on the voice mode. So I'm going to just sort of talk and have a conversation, say with ChatGPT. And I think it's important for me to just say upfront, first of all, that we don't include any client details, we don't include any information that could re-identify people. We're talking very much in sort of broader terms. But I might just sort of say, hey, I'm thinking about talking about, this particular issue. What are the kinds of avenues I could think about? What are the different perspectives I could explore? So that
mm,
maybe you turn up to supervision just having had a little bit of preparation around the possibilities that
mhm,
you could be taking, or maybe you've gained some alternative perspectives and you're taking that along to your session. The other thing that I think is really helpful, and I now do this every time I have supervision. When I finish supervision, I then talk to ChatGPT to reflect on what I've gained from my supervision. So
mm,
obviously, as speech and language therapists, we should be writing up our reflections, following any kind of CPD.
mm,
Um, and sometimes I think that can feel like a bit of a tick box exercise. It's like, oh, I've got to fill in the diary and I've got to write, and it doesn't necessarily feel like a really sort of deeply reflective process. But what I found by using AI is that actually it extends the benefit of the supervision beyond that supervision session, because it will ask me questions like, why did you decide to take that particular issue? What have you learned that you're going to be taking into your future practice? So it knows the questions that are going to get me just to dig a little bit deeper and reflect on my learning. And then what it will do, which is lovely, is it will then write up that conversation that I've had with it. So my voice is still in there, but it will say, would you like me to put this together now to summarize the discussion that we've had?
yeah.
And so that then goes into my CPD log. Um, and that I think is just I've found it is just really, as I say, it's kind of extended the benefit of the supervision session outside of that hour that I've had, with that professional supervisor.
Yeah. Yeah. Which, I mean, I think that using the voice is particularly interesting because I don't find getting my thoughts down in writing
Mm,
particularly or as easy as having a conversation. So it's
yeah,
kind of
I
perhaps
agree.
making that a bit more fluid, isn't it?
Definitely, definitely. I find writing and typing quite laborious. I just because I think my thoughts travel much faster. And I think that's why writing up CPD to me sort of feels like a real sort of drain. Whereas just talking about it, as you say, it's much more fluent and you can travel at the speed of your thoughts and your
Mm,
insights, but you can still then capture it
mm,
and record that in writing, because obviously that conversation is then kind of held there.
mm,
So yeah, that's made a massive difference to me, I have to
mm,
say.
mm. That's so interesting. So do you think we're at the point where an AI tool can replace your supervisor, your human supervisor?
Yeah, I mean that's a $1 million question, isn't it? But I mean, AI can certainly contribute to reflective practice, but
Mm.
absolutely no, it cannot be a professional supervisor. And I think, there's lots of reasons for that, in that, it's not human.
Mm,
Um, the way in which generative AI, so sort of large language models like ChatGPT work, is they're kind of, really sophisticated, almost like predictive text machines, in that if I say something to it, it's just making a judgment based on all the data it's been trained on for what would be the most likely thing that someone would next say in that conversation. So,
Mm,
it's based on a sort of highly complex algorithm, not on any kind of level of humanity or kind of human reasoning. And what it
mm,
can't do is it's not going to pick up on maybe non-verbal signals. It's not like forming a relationship with someone where you're building trust over time so that you gradually are able to be more authentic, within that space. I think what's positive is that it does bring that non-judgmental approach that we hope that we have within supervision. But
mm.
what it's not going to do is it's not going to make a judgment on my emotional well-being as a
Yeah,
supervisee. It's not going to understand that within the kind of context of my life. And it's not going to know when maybe it should be saying, do you know what, Rachel? I think maybe you need to slow down or stop,
yeah,
or you need to kind of seek some other kind of support. Um, and I mean, a couple of other things. It makes mistakes. It
yeah,
will, if it doesn't know the answer, it's going to make something up that sounds entirely plausible. Now, that's not to say that humans don't make mistakes, but humans are much better at sort of saying, "Oh, I really don't know about that," or "I think it
yeah,
might be that, but I'm not sure." Whereas AI will just very confidently say something that is, absolutely wrong.
yeah.
Um,
I've certainly seen
so,
that if I've put in anything into a search, but it's a
mm,
topic you know very well, sometimes when it
yes,
comes up, you're like, oh, it's close. It's not
yeah.
quite right.
Yeah, yeah, and that's where it comes back to, yeah, it's a machine of probability. It's like making a very, very good guess, but actually,
Mm.
it was wrong. So I think, there's lots of ways that it can enhance our reflective practice, but
Yeah.
there is no replacement for having a kind of a human being on the other side of a conversation.
Yeah, and that the first couple of episodes of this series, we've spoken about trauma-informed supervision and how important that is. So your point about that um, emotional well-being and the human being able to identify um, those the emotional side, the body side, and being able to stop and make sure that that is reflected on and supported as well, I think is a really valuable point.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's just, it's not had experience of living in a physical world. There's lots of
Mm.
things it just doesn't understand. But
Mhm.
and I think the other thing to say as well is that we know there's quite a lot of bias built in to AI. So
Yeah.
it's likely to give us very sort of westernized viewpoints, quite sort of narrow perspectives sometimes. And again, that's not to say that as human beings, of course, we're biased as well, and we may default
Mm.
towards Western, kind of viewpoints. But um, I think there's something about being able to have a conversation with another person and kind of interrogate those potential biases
Yeah.
rather than something that sounds so confident about its position that you're not even prompted to kind of question it.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's such an important part of our professional development, isn't it? That
Mm.
questioning of the usual or the same way of doing things. When you're working with people and
Yes.
everyone's so different. Um,
Yeah.
I think that's the wonderful thing about our profession is we've really lent into the person-centered model of working because we can see how valuable it is,
Mm.
to the people we work with.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the dangers is that because AI is so accessible, that it's easier for us to kind of ask AI as opposed to asking a person. And I'm thinking particularly, maybe of early career therapists who, I can, it's a long time ago, but I can still remember what it feels like to kind of, be fresh in the job and have so many questions. And
Mm,
I can how easy it would be to continually ask AI, because you don't want to necessarily take up somebody else's time. I had some
Mm.
really wonderful mentors and supervisors, but they were incredibly busy people, and so I can imagine if I had something there that actually I could just easily turn to, that would be quite tempting. But it's what comes out of those conversations with those people that I think really can enhance our development. And I think the other thing as well is that there's potential when something's so easily accessible to start to kind of skip the kind of the hard cognitive work. So
Mm.
that's one of the things that we're seeing through the research, is that um, if we engage and we use AI in a way that's very kind of proactive and questioning, that it can definitely enhance our critical thinking skills. But if we're kind of outsourcing and we're just doing this cognitive offloading, and we're like, oh, well, I'll just ask AI, I'll ask AI, that we stop sort of that building of that kind of clinical muscle, as it were.
Mm.
Um, and so I think, yeah, it's so important, isn't it, to do that kind of wrestling with the problem, which is what we do inside supervision. I'm a great advocate for, yes, bring whatever you like to supervision, but if you can bring like one thing that we're really going to kind of dig deep into,
Mm.
um, you know, that we can really move with and we can kind of wrestle with, and that you can have time to kind of pick apart and try and put across to me as the supervisor. I'm sure you find the same, like 90% of the time that person reaches the conclusion of what they needed from that, really
Mm.
without very much input from the supervisor. But it's just that they've had time to be
Mm-hmm.
able to kind of, practice that clinical muscle. Well,
Mm.
if we just sort of ask AI that question and it pings back, that's taken a lot less time, but we haven't built those skills. So
Yeah.
yeah,
And
that's kind of one of
sometimes,
my concerns.
yeah, and sometimes people come to supervision maybe thinking, oh, I don't have a particular thing, a particular question this time, which, AI would be, well, fine, we're done. But,
Yes.
in a human interaction, when you ask, okay, well, tell me something interesting that's happening, and then
Mm,
you start exploring, and the questions, the skill in having a space like that is having someone to find out what is interesting and how to dig further,
yeah.
and it still moves you forward. It doesn't have to be a problem based space. It often is, but
Yeah.
there's so much room to grow outside of that. And I think AI might struggle with that. Or would it? I don't know. What you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's it's quite good, I would say, at being able to kind of build on something. So what you'll
Okay.
notice when you're using AI is that we'll always come back with, would you like me to do this now? Would you like to explore that? Which
Mm.
can be quite helpful, but actually might then end up sort of leading you off in a direction that wasn't necessarily where you wanted to go. Whereas I think a human supervisor tends to sit back more and just allow that time and space for the person to move in the direction that they need to go. And
Mm.
I don't necessarily think that AI has that skill at the moment. It's very good at offering lots of different sort of, help, but just to be able to pause and wait for somebody to process something, and just to kind of notice the bit that maybe was missing, or the bit that's the kind of the block or the limiting belief, or the
Mm.
thing that's maybe just that barrier that's getting in the way for someone. um I'm not so sure that AI would be able to kind of notice or tease that out. It's very sycophantic. So what it will be doing is it will be saying, you can have this help or this help. I can do this. So it's very sort of, generous, as it were, in terms of supplying lots of possible solutions. But that does then de-skill that supervisee in terms of, actually, I took a bit of time and I got there myself.
Mm.
Because I think that's the thing that then, generalizes outside of supervision is sometimes like, if people come to me and say, do you know what, I was going to bring this to supervision and then I was thinking about how we might talk about it and actually I've managed to sort it out. And they've kind of done it for themselves.
Yeah, I absolutely. And my favorite mentors, supervisors, when I've come away, I've always thought, how how did I come up with that myself? And
Yeah.
it's through their skill of allowing time or asking the right question to, and then you feel so much stronger as a
Mm.
clinician and more able to move forward. That's such a
Yeah.
valuable skill in supervision. Yeah. So yeah, perhaps a pitfall of using 2i too extensively.
Yeah, definitely. I think that humans, particularly if you're a skilled and experienced supervisor, are more able to have those difficult conversations. When you do
Mm.
identify that somebody has, perhaps something that is a barrier for them, it's knowing how to supportively help that person to explore that. And sometimes it is about saying, do you know what? I think maybe some different kind of help would be beneficial for you here. Have you thought about having some counseling or some
Yeah.
therapy? Because I can see that there are things that are having an impact on your life and your professional, experience that
Mm.
actually are not necessarily within the remit of what a supervisor,
Mm.
might be dealing with. So, in those conversations, I think I would not necessarily imagine would occur within a conversation with an AI potentially.
Mm. And yeah, and sometimes it's spotting, isn't it, where somebody is um pausing or stopping, like you say, that non-verbal cue that tells you, hold
Mm.
on, let's go back a bit and tell me more about that part.
Yeah, or it might be that somebody starts talking about something different and their facial expression really changes, or, their face lights up, and actually just being able to reflect back and say, oh, I noticed when you started talking about that, your posture really, really changed. Those things I think are sometimes key at helping people to gain insight into actually what is the key thing that is fulfilling within my job, or what is it
Mm.
that actually I'm really wanting to do or I get excited about.
Yeah, yeah, really important. Okay, so we've talked a bit about the pitfalls. How
Hmm.
how do you find AI useful? What would you summarize as the useful parts of for reflective practice?
I think some of the things I've already talked about, I find it good as a sort of a sounding board for often I'll have just a sort of a fresh idea about something. I'm kind of somebody who's always sort of looking for something different, something new. Um,
Yeah,
and and so, and I don't necessarily have somebody to kind of bounce that off straight away. And that's something
mm,
about working in independent practice when you're, kind of
yeah,
working on your own. So I will, and sometimes, I have these thoughts at a time which is not necessarily when I'm sort of sat at my desk working. So
yeah,
quite often you might see me, I'm kind of getting up in the morning, I'm kind of in the bedroom or whatever, and I'll switch on AI and I'll go, I've just had this thought about, this particular thing. What do you think? And so I can talk to it, and it's like I can get the thought sort of out of my mind and somewhere and progress it somewhere,
yeah,
and also then sort of shelve it, as it were, because I know that conversation is going to be on my chat GPT when I come back to it. So when I'm ready, I haven't lost the idea. I was like, oh yeah, I had a conversation about that at some point. So I find that really helpful. Um, I also find it really helpful just in terms of understanding something new. So this relates a bit more to my clinical work, but the other day I was due to go and review a child, uh, review his speech basically, and his mum had emailed me the day before to say, oh, by the way, what he's really interested in at the moment is the NASA Artemis mission.
mm,
Um,
mm,
and and I did not know any information about this, but I thought, right, it's going to be really important if I'm going to sort of connect with him to understand something about this. So again, actually, it was I was probably like cleaning the kitchen or something, and so I just sort of said to the AI, can you talk to me like I'm 5 and explain to me what the NASA Artemis mission is? And so it did. And then I sort of said, okay, imagine I'm 10 now. Tell me a bit more. Now I'm 15. Now I'm 25. So what it did is it gradually kind of increased my awareness and my knowledge around this
Yeah.
particular topic so that I could then engage with this young boy, around this. And actually, we developed some resources. But in terms of bringing that back to supervision, sometimes people will email me before a supervision session and just say, oh, by the way, I want to talk about this today. And
Mm.
and it might be something that I don't know about, and so I might use AI in the same kind of way. Not that I'm expecting to come as an expert to supervision. It doesn't matter if I actually don't
Mm.
know anything about it, because asking that person to explain to me can also be really helpful. But sometimes I like just to sort of go with a bit of an understanding of the context.
Yeah.
So it's very good if you kind of tell it what level information you need, then it will really help in that respect.
Yeah. Give
Um,
you a starting point to then move on from.
yeah, yeah. The other thing I was going to say as well is that so for some supervisees that I work with, one of the things they find a bit of a challenge is sort of being fully engaged in the supervision session, but also sort of taking their own notes at the same time, or making a note of things that we're talking about. So I've started to use something called Heidi AI, which is a GDPR compliant sort of medical AI scribe. So with their consent, we have that AI running in the background, and then
Mm.
when we get to the end of the session, it will basically summarize what we've talked about, and I will then check that through, make sure that there's no kind of errors in there,
Mm.
save that on their clinical notes, and I'm then able to send that to them, so that they've then got that record. So there's no pressure on either of us to be writing stuff down. We can be fully engaged in the human interaction, but we have a really good record of what we've covered. And that many supervisees have just found really, really helpful.
Mm. Yeah, because I saw some research as well in I think it was in psychotherapy where they were using transcriptions of a session to take to supervision to review. It's like,
Okay, yeah.
that's interesting, but I also felt like how much that misses from
Mm,
the interaction it records, but also in terms of non-verbals, but also on the person's reflection. If what you're doing is bringing the text,
yes. Yeah,
um, but
absolutely.
what you're saying about that sort of reflective muscle, the clinical muscle that it takes to explain to somebody else what happened, what I did, the response.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. I think the kind of the use of Heidi in this way is more of a reminder of what we've
we've
discussed,
discussed. Yeah,
so that we don't feel the pressure at the same time to be kind of noting
yeah.
it down. But then the use of the AI after the session to continue the reflection, I think then kind
Mm.
of deepens what you've got from the session. So yeah, I mean, lots of different uses.
And finally, what advice would you give somebody who's looking for something different from their supervision?
Yes, it's an interesting question, that one. I think because I think it's about whether you're looking for something different within your current supervision relationship.
Mm.
And I would say if you're feeling like that, it's really good to have some kind of a review of your process with your supervisor, to look at. So I have like a questionnaire that I do with people from time to time, just to sort of reflect on what's coming out of this relationship, what's working well, is there something different? So definitely talk about it with your supervisor if you're wanting something different from that relationship. But I think also be open just to kind of changing things up.
Mm.
You don't have to stick with the same supervisor forever. Sometimes it can be helpful just to make that switch. Or some supervisees that I work with, if we've worked for sort of quite some time, suggest like a blended model. So actually, is there somebody else that you think you would like to meet with? And maybe we alternate because you're going to get something different from each supervision relationship, whether that's that they've got a slightly different clinical background or just more kind of the sort of approach and the person, that they are. Um, and I think it's also important not to necessarily try to go for a direct clinical match with your supervisor as well. So sometimes I think you can get locked into a supervision relationship that becomes very much about sort of it might become a bit more advice based because that supervisor knows your clinical area. And actually, if
Mm.
you pick somebody who doesn't, then you end up needing to sort of verbally clarify quite a few things, which that process in itself can help you to work through. I always think talking is thinking, isn't it? And if we don't have to do that much talking to explore something, you haven't actually had to do that thinking. I think the most important thing from my perspective is if you don't feel that the person that you're in that supervision relationship with, that it allows you to be as authentically you as possible, then maybe it's not, the best match, or maybe there's something that needs to change within that relationship. But I genuinely feel that if you're able to be authentically you within that supervision relationship and feel in no way judged and that space is safe, it really helps you to reflect on the job that you do and actually how you can be your most authentic form of yourself within the work that you do, because
Yeah.
that is when it becomes the most fulfilling profession, I think.
Mm.
So yeah, that would be my advice.
Really good advice. Yeah. Thank you so much. It's been a really interesting conversation.
Yeah,
If,
thank you.
and if you are out there looking for a new supervisory relationship, there's a list of supervisors, a supervisor register available on the intandem.co.uk website. Thank you very much for listening.